Welcome to my lovely panel, Mark, Kristian and Lubomila. And I'd love you to say a couple of words about yourself, what you do and which company you come from.
Sure. So, hi everybody. So I am Mark Fisher. I work for EY and I work in their sustainability team based in London normally. So we have about 2,500 people globally.
Not long to go now.
Focused on helping our clients to navigate sustainability issues. So we're focused on helping them to improve the way in which they both manage issues, but also how they disclose on that. And so you can imagine a particular focus of ours is to keep them honest and to make sure that when they are talking publicly about their sustainability performance, that it is based up in substance. Quite a challenge sometimes.
Kristian.
So the way I usually present what I do is that I do the two things that scare people the most and bore people the most. So if you want a sense of intense cognitive dissonance, come and talk to me afterwards. So being scared and bored at the same time is a unique experience. But more concretely, what I do is that I work on climate change, the scary part, and then accounting. So we provide software to large businesses to account for their full carbon footprint, both in their own operations, but quite crucially in their value chain as well, because for a typical business, 90% of their overall emissions are located in the value chain. So we help them, give them actionable insights so they can take the right action to go towards net zero emissions.
Awesome stuff. And he's just been with Arnie. He's just jetted in from being with Arnie in Vienna, so you can ask him about that later. Lubomila.
Hi, my name is Rönn. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Plan A. We have a software as a service platform for decarbonization and ESG improvement. So we enable businesses to track against the targets that they've set and also the assessment that they've made, how they can actually become better and contribute significantly to the transformation of our economy. Also, 2 years ago, I set up an NGO called the Green Tech Alliance. So what we do there, which is kind of a business that I don't spend much time on, but we have a team that is working on that. We support businesses that are working on climate-related challenges to have access to visibility, capital, and expertise. We have now more than 2,000 businesses and also 500 advisors. I'm really excited for the discussion, and I'll stop here.
No, it's brilliant to have you all. Before we start with the actual questions, I just wanted to kind of read a few words of reflection. Exxon is rated top 10 best in the world for environment, social and governance, ESG by S&P 500, while Tesla didn't make the list. ESG is a scam. It has been weaponized by phony social justice warriors, so says Elon Musk. And as an aside, or not, the 2021 Carbon Majors GHG report, published in 2021, put Exxon as the fourth most carbon-emitting company in the world. And by the way, BP and Shell are ranked 6th and 7th, respectively. Doesn't this smack of greenwashing? I mean, how can this be? I mean, where is the current system of reporting going wrong? Mark?
Nice, easy question to start with. And Elon Musk sometimes talks sense. He's got a point there, but it's a very complicated landscape. Perhaps part of the challenge is just the sheer volume of information that companies are being asked to report on. So those of you who've heard of the GRI and SDGs, I think both of those frameworks for reporting on sustainability performance contain about 200 different indicators that you could report against. So it's very easy for a company to pick and choose the areas where they can demonstrate their best selves. We all do that. If you were on a dating app, you would demonstrate your best self, wouldn't you? If you're a company, you want to be able to demonstrate your best self, and so you can pick and choose your performance to some extent. For companies, it's a challenge to know sort of which one of these initiatives or which framework that they should follow. People talk about there being 600 different sustainability frameworks that you can respond to. So it becomes easier to sort of decide, well, we're going to head in a direction that makes us look good. So I think that's one part of the challenge. Is it's easy to pick and choose what you report on in a way in which you cannot do so easily for financial reporting. The other is just the quality of the underlying information. So it's, you know, it can be sketchy, and I'm sure the others will talk a little bit to this. There's a lot of there's a lot of estimation within that, and companies are getting, senior leaders within companies are getting increasingly nervous about the information that they are putting into the public domain. Just to give you one example, a oil and gas company that we have done some work with, within its CDP disclosures, had 4 different risks that it had highlighted, each of which they valued at 10 times the exposure than the market cap of that company. I mean, that cannot logically be true, that in order to respond to a risk, it's going to cost them 10 times more than the business is worth. and the problem there is who has put that data into the public domain. It's the lack of control.
Somebody who was adding an extra zero. Or
It's somebody who can see they'll get a better score from CDP if they just put more and more information into that platform, without really having the sort of governance within the organisation to check that what they're saying is sensible. So it's a sort of well-intentioned environmental quasi-specialist that might have done that, but it doesn't always lead to the best outcome.
Clearly. Kristian.
So, I mean, to give some more flavor to what you said, I think for climate change in particular, there is a huge risk, and I think the stakes around greenwashing are huge. I'm worried that in 10 years, we might have all major companies claiming to be carbon neutral, but we will still see global emissions go up. And at least my explanation to that would be that we're combining good intentions with bad mathematics. So what that means more concretely is that I think a lot of companies want to do the right thing, but when it comes to carbon emissions in particular, they don't know how to account for their carbon emissions. They don't know what carbon offsets or credit to trust in a market that is flooded with absolutely trash carbon offsets. So we end up in a situation where a lot of companies only account for 10% of their total carbon emissions. Then they invest in some, carbon offsets, planting some trees that might only exist for, a few years if they exist at all. And as some in the audience might be aware, there's this, European Commission study looking at the offsets under clean developmental mechanism. Only 15% of those, reduced emissions whatsoever. So I mean, if you combine, I'm accounting for 10% of my emissions with maybe only 10% of the carbon offsets that I invest in reduce emissions, then we have companies today that are actually only reducing 1% of their total emissions, and they're still putting this kind of stamp on carbon neutrality. And I mean, the intentions are great, but it's just that we lack the standardization. We have the poor mathematics in terms of how we account for all of those metrics, and we expect investors and stakeholders to make decisions based on it, and it simply doesn't work. We need standardization.
Yes, because at the moment we're comparing apples and pears with bananas. Lubomila.
I think the fundamental truth we need to understand is that our economy at the moment is not based on an assessment that is related to the true value of all the activities that we have as businesses, as individuals. And if you look at how, building up on what you were saying about mathematics, if you look at the way we calculate success, at the moment we're reliant on KPIs like growth, GDP, margins, and these are quite well defined. We understand them well, but they're decoupled from the actual value that has taken place somewhere in order for this to be possible as an activity, as an output. So what we've done as smart people that are really good at KPIs is develop a metric system that is called ESG that has thousands of different definitions and includes a lot of different KPIs, allowing us to compensate for this lack of good understanding of the value. Just to give you a perspective of the level of ambiguity that we have at the moment, Plan A, my company, we work with over 1,000 businesses, and quite a few of them sit within the financial industry, which means that we assess these big portfolios of private equities, VCs, but we also work with automotive. And with VC. So for the smaller financial institutions, you have assessment on ESG that is based on 30 questions. For the private equities, where the stakes are bigger because they understand that ESG risk is financial risk, there's 300 questions. Where in this reality are we talking about the same kind of assessment and same level of depth? I think at the moment, this kind of status quo is creating a lot of drama that allows people like Elon Musk to also get angry. But we also need to understand that it's not all bad in the sense that we're trying to move the economic model to one that is based on true value. It's just that we're not there yet.
Yeah, and I think also we're operating in an environment where 60% of employees, choose a place to work based on their beliefs and values, and they increasingly condemn companies that don't uphold them. And we're also seeing a kind of Gen Z and exodus from companies where they're going into companies where they feel that their job doesn't contribute towards ending climate change or whatever. And corporate whistleblowing is really on the rise. I mean, we had Caroline Dennett, only last week, whistleblowing, and NGOs such as Greenpeace or Oxfam are also calling companies out. How can a lot of these corporate whistleblowers actually lose their jobs and livelihoods. I mean, it takes enormous courage to stand up and say, my company's doing the wrong thing. I mean, how can we actually close what I call the say-do gap as a matter of urgency? Kristian?
Yeah, good. That's also a tricky question. How can we close the gap? I will leave it to someone else to respond in the meantime.
Lubomila.
I would highly recommend to any one of you that enjoys good content to Google millennials ruining stuff. So that's essentially this kind of movement in media that is explaining how the Gen Zs and others are taking a chance to complain about a certain product, but are loud enough to basically explain that this product is absolutely bollocks and then you should not ever buy it again. Diamonds, wet wipes, and so on. And most of these comments actually come because of the concern for the environmental, social, and governance elements. When we think about kind of the role that employees play, I can speak again from the perspective of the work that we do with Plan A. Actually, a quarter of the clients that we get don't come through the top management, but come through employees wanting to see change within their organization. And these people not only do whistleblowing, but they also battle for budgets so that they can pay for the software that we offer. They're also the ones that on the side of their full-time job organize events, information sessions, they gather content. And I hope that there's a few of you amongst here, because this is actually quite of a big muscle in this movement that we have at the moment. I think, and this is what we discussed with you earlier, we are not going to see less of that going forward. And I salute all of these efforts because we need to have this correcting element there and to constantly be on our toes as businesses, because we don't have a perfect system and we need to be taking all the different steps and everyone to be constantly looking to make sure that the results are there. But what I also see from other stakeholders is that the push does not only come from employees. It comes from investors, because investors are scared for losing their money because they understand that there's a lot at stake. It comes also from the regulator that is constantly pushing new legislation. We need standardization, but still there's a lot going on. And then the final stakeholder that is one that is very close to my heart, given a quarter of my team is scientists, is the scientific community that is constantly alarming us on the status quo where we are at.
Yeah, surely.
I mean, part of it is the need to be authentic as a business and actually do what you say you're doing. And whilst there will always be people who don't want to work in a particular sector because they think that sector is a bad sector or a bad actor, there will also be people who are very willing to work within that sector, provided the company does what it says it's doing. And so if it claims that it is sustainable or green in some way, and it announces plans to drive a better future, if there's no substance that sits behind that, then as an employee, why would I want to work for that company? In the same way in which if the strategy that it was developed was was built on sand, why would I want to work for that company? You want to be within an organization that is going to be successful and is going to make you successful as an individual as being part of that. And so if it isn't authentic, then the talent moves elsewhere to a business where they can see that they can make a difference and that the organization lives up to what it says it's going to do.
I have a quick response now, and it's kind of funny. I left the World Economic Forum recently, and one thing that a lot of CEOs said is that a lot of employees write them on Slack on sustainability issues. So maybe the answer is slacktivism, but not the type of slacktivism that you associate the word with, but actually on Slack, you often have, your business leaders and CEOs, and as the employee of a company, you can reach out to them and ask questions around, how are we doing in terms of sustainability? So I think there's a lot of power to be wielded inside of an organization. And maybe, all of our customers will be angry with me now for suggesting that when they will be bombarded on Slack. But yeah,
no, I think that's a superb idea. Thank you. But I mean, it's not all a complete picture of doom and gloom. I mean, there are some positive things happening, definitely. What's positive which is happening under your leadership and or in the wider world? What are the glimmers, the rays of hope? Lubomila.
2 weeks ago, I spoke at an event to 100 CMOs, and the topic that was given to me to prepare a speech on was about how there's no more license anymore to be telling good stories without action. And I'm sure that many of you would agree, there's been a lot of intended greenwashing. There's been a lot of stories that have been told by fast fashion companies. There's been stories that have been told in other domains. And what we definitely have been able to see with regards to kind of the license to not be anymore just storyteller is that businesses are understanding that there's a lot of money loss at stake. Not only because of the whole concept, climate risk is financial risk, ESG risk is financial risk, but also because of the employees that are moving to places which are aligned to their values. And if you've invested into training someone, making them better prepared to do their job, and ultimately being an advocate for what you're selling, probably it is better to keep these people rather than lose them and then find someone that has different values. And then the final bit, which I think is quite critical, and there's a lot of statistics that demonstrate this, is the consumer choice. At the moment you have, and it has been proven by fashion, but also by fast-moving goods and products, people that have a purchasing power that allows them to stand for their values are going into a shop and checking how long did this travel to get here. There's a lot of people that spend time on figuring out the kind of the material from which something is made. Guilty as charged. Like if I take the chance on buying some clothing, I take literally weeks until I'm sure that the supply chain, a bit too much maybe, but definitely, this kind of investigation is not something that is only secluded to people that are professionals within the sustainability sphere. It is every one of us that has day-to-day choices that we need to make as employees, as consumers, as investors maybe, and that's something that doesn't give any more license to anyone to just be doing greenwashing, because you're going to be called out by one of those stakeholders.
Surely.
But do you think that goes that deep at the moment? Because whilst there are people who will take the time to investigate that, there's probably a lot of people who would still buy a product because it's got eco on the label without there being the degree of scrutiny and control that's required to support that. And the same in which you could, we've seen this massive explosion of ESG funds at the moment. So you can put your money into a product, whether that's part of a pension or more broadly, but how many people actually stop and say, what are the underlying investments that sit within that fund? And does that fund truly, when it says ESG, does it live
if
it?
you end up doing that, then the German police comes and investigates you and takes all of your documents to make sure that you're actually compliant. So the truth is that what we see at least is an increased level of understanding and maturity of the consumers and also of the employees. Is it fully covering the whole planet? No. Is Europe leading the way? For sure. the EU and the UK are doing a fantastic job of, first of all, setting up frameworks on aligning the whole language. Second, at least what we see is this employee activism is something that is moving so fast. There's a lot of even unionization within companies around climate. Companies like Amazon, Google have been getting a lot of requests. I think we have still a long way to go, but I can definitely say that having been a professional in this industry for 6 years, I've never been more confident that we stand a chance of getting things done.
Which is very hopeful. Thank you. Kristian, what glimmers of hope are you seeing?
I would say a glimmer of hope is that the good intentions are really there. I mean, we see more companies than ever setting, carbon neutrality or net zero targets, which is great. And we're starting to see, that pick up speed. We're starting to see some exponential slopes. But again, I think the intentions are there. We need to sort out the standardization and mathematics, so we make sure that these companies are actually held accountable with their net zero targets. You are able to see a decrease of carbon emissions over time, and unless the accounting, reporting, and standardization, like all of the boring things that I would love to talk to you about afterwards, unless all of those boring things are solved, I'm afraid that those good intentions will fizzle out to nothingness. But the intentions are there, which is the most important thing.
Half the battle.
Just to add a little bit of maybe controversy, I don't think we should call any of these activities boring, because at the moment we're reestablishing the way the economy operates, and this is so exciting. And all of us that are awoken here to the idea that this is important have a chance to be contributing to this new version of our economy. And I think probably there's never been a generation that has been given the license to reshape its reality so much, because we have basically a gun against our heads, but still with the opportunity to use our knowledge, our skills, regardless of where they come from.
Yeah, I don't think it's boring. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it for a living.
No, if you think how
Mark and his glimmer of
well, I think we need to recognise how far we've come already. The fact that you were all in the room this afternoon on a hot day rather than sunbathing says something about how important this is to people now. And if I think of when we try and recruit people now, we're absolutely inundated with people who want to come and work in the field of sustainability. 10 years ago, it was a real struggle to get any decent quality CVs to find junior hires. So we now have completely the opposite problem, because we have too many people who want to work in this space. But that's a great challenge to have. And whilst we can be negative about the quality of information that's out there or the extent of it and some of the claims that are made, the fact that we're talking about it and challenging organisations and calling them out, again, illustrates the fact that people have now taken a stop and recognise the importance of this. And we've even had, we have a conservative government in this country at the moment that has mandated TCFD reporting. They're going to mandate transition plan reporting. So later this year, they're probably going to announce that every large company will have to include within its disclosures how that company is going to support the transition to a lower carbon economy. I mean, when you think about that, that is quite staggering to think about. A government that prides itself on deregulation. So that does make me it does make me hopeful.
Hopeful, yes. We do need some hope. Human-induced climate change is already causing dangerous and widespread disruption. We're enjoying a beautiful day here, but in southern Europe, the temperatures are already hitting over 40 degrees, for instance. It's affecting the lives of billions of people. And I think the IPCC report, recent one, said at least 3 billion people's livelihoods were seriously at risk. We need to act urgently. What's needed for the future? And how can we also move from just concentrating on a sliver of the E to actually focusing on the full E, S and G? What are your thoughts about that? What do governments need to do? What do corporations need to do? Kristian.
I think we need to change, and this is big, right? I mean, this is not going to happen over a day, but we need to fundamentally incorporate externalities, regardless if it's social, environmental, doesn't matter. We need to incorporate it into the profit and loss statement of enterprises. Enterprises today have a huge cost base, a huge liability on their P&L that is not visible. And I think the only way that can happen is through regulation. We don't have the frameworks in place of how to exactly do it, but I think that has to be the end goal, where we can rest assured that the profit maximization of companies are also aligned with human values, our strive for happiness and well-being, and the well-being of the planet and the ecosystems.
Yeah, because I mean, we can't have healthy people living on an unhealthy planet, that is for certain. Mark, what needs to happen?
Well, I mean, I would agree that we need to account more effectively for those externalities. Work is ongoing to try and get to that, but we shouldn't underestimate the complexity of that and how long it will take to achieve that, particularly to get international agreement around it. So if we think of how long it took thousands of years to have a common global approach to accounting for money. Yeah. Hopefully it's not going to take us as long in the sustainable hemisphere. No, we might not be around, but there is movement towards that. The difficulty is if you don't get that international agreement, then what you will see is that companies will outsource parts of their operation, or they'll move operations to parts of the world that are less stringent in terms of that accounting approach.
Yes.
There are already plenty of unintended consequences out there in relation to sustainability, and we don't need too many more if we can help it.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Lubomila, if you were in charge, sorting out this system, what would you do?
The first step we need to take is alignment of the language that we use. What is happening at the moment, unfortunately, is a lot of different storytelling around climate change that really doesn't allow all the stakeholders to be pushing for the same agenda. When someone tells you carbon neutrality, for some companies this is their scope 1 and 2, for other companies it's scope 1, 2 and 3. Is everyone here familiar with the concept of scope 1, 2 and 3?
Probably not.
I see some nodding. Anyone is not? Okay, a lot of people. So there's an international framework that explains how emissions get to be calculated. And it's something that we've agreed upon, which is great, because that means that gives us kind of the first step to being able to speak this similar language. Scope 1 is facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is purchase services like heating, cooling, electricity. And Scope 3, and this is where it gets funny, is purchase goods and services, which is all your suppliers, it's your investments, it's work from home, it is commute, it is travel, logistics, end of use of products. For every industry, for every company, these scopes could be quite different, because even an automotive is not the same as any other automotive, but we know which categories of activities within a business contribute to this negative impact. So going back to what I was saying, if we speak about this alignment of language, we're not there yet to really be speaking about climate action in the same manner, because something could be a wonderful website that speaks about product-led innovation that does not cover the whole firm as a sustainable mindset-led one, or it could be like a whole company that really is doing continuous kind of misalignment to the actual code of conduct that we need to follow. I think once we have this settled, then we can start actually aligning stakeholders. Stakeholders at the moment are also pushing different agendas, and it feels a little bit like we're running these small sprints rather than doing a marathon altogether. This is something that we see as we speak to the regulators, which are telling us, okay, we're proposing this framework, like the EU taxonomy, and we're like, did you speak to the corporates to ask them if they have knowledge on how many birds are affected by the facility that they built in the middle of Germany or in the middle of the UK for that regard? And the response is no, but they need to report in 3 months on that. Corporates, on the other hand, announced the net zero targets and the carbon neutrality agendas, without actually knowing how this is going to be implemented at scale. And then the consumers are constantly looking for some confirmation that a certain certification or a label is valid, but then they get quite lost in all the marketing messages. And then the final bit, which I think is where it gets probably quite tricky, is because it's still a painful process that we're all going through. There's a lot of eco-anxiety going on. We see it in the younger team members that we have within our team. We see it in other people that are within our community. Is to start understanding that we're living with climate change as something that is part of our lives. We should stop considering that climate change is just some sort of an event that is decoupled from our choices of clothes, choices of travel. We need to accept and normalize climate change as something that will be part of our lives, because we've passed the moment when this is going to be just an event that will fix it. Someone else is going to fix it. It will be part of every single person's life. And once we accept this, we have actually a better battle chance of being able to fix at least a little bit of the problem.
I think that's a very good suggestion, to really think in daily life, do my choices reflect my values? And with that, I think we are open to some audience questions. Does anybody have any questions for the panel? I think we've got someone with a mic. There's, yeah.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. I was just wondering, picking up one point by Kristian Rönn. This is about the getting organizations to build in the climate and other considerations into their profits and costs, which I fully agree with, by the way. I'm just wondering, do you see that, do you and others see that more as an accounting issue, or actually getting governments to legislate to make sure that the costs are that the organizations that are producing goods and services actually build in those costs and actually pay for the climate effects of that, and to clean up things. And also related to that, I'm just wondering. Actually, I'll just probably leave it at that.
That's quite a chunky answer. Kristian,
I mean, I think it's both, right? I mean, we both need to solve the accounting problem, and as you said earlier, Mark, I mean, it's not the easiest problem to solve. But we need to invest more in it, and we need to reach some sort of agreement of how to price externalities and how to incorporate it in the P&L. And then, of course, we need to regulate around that as well. I mean, I think, accounting is such a powerful tool. It's, in a sense, the engine of the entire world economy. It enables financial markets. It enables me to say, I can compare company A to company B because the P&L looks exactly the same. But then we have all of these externalities that are not incorporated. So we need to make the comparisons fair. And if we have that tool, then we can do all sorts of regulation around those common metrics. The same way we regulate things around P&L. I mean, based on the P&L, we might have various types of taxes. How are we going to tax you? How are we going to make sure that you pay for whatever we need you to pay for to keep the governments up and running, and making sure that maximize social good and welfare and so on. So question is, I think, undoubtedly both, but you need to start with the accounting standard and just come to some sort of agreement around it.
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, in the UK, mandatory TCFD disclosure is really starting to drive that change in relation to climate change, not in relation to the wider social issues that we talked about earlier. And I work within an accounting organisation. EY is probably known by many people as an accountancy firm. So I have probably half a dozen conversations a week with my accountant colleagues who are challenging the organisations that they work with around how they account properly for their exposure to climate risk. And for some, it's not necessarily that material a risk, but for others, it is really quite stark. And you're starting to see that much closer link between the qualitative assessment of what might happen from a future scenarios point of view and how that flows through to the back half, so the detailed numbers within their accounts. So it is moving, but this has only just come in, and so it will take a bit of time to really understand how that should flow through.
Lubomila, you wanted to add something?
I wanted to add a very concrete example of what many of our clients actually do that is an opportunity for all of you that are business leaders or can influence the decision of how your company is managed, can push for. We work with a company called Gani, which is a fashion giant in Scandinavia. And what they kicked off, but we actually have a lot of other companies I can give as an example doing the same thing, was embed an internal carbon tax. And this is where you start accounting for the externalities without being regulated, because as much as I'm optimistic, this is probably the best way to do it, where we're all speaking the same language. I don't trust there's going to be an international framework for standardization of embedding externalities anytime soon. So any company that is now with a lot of ambition for sustainability can kick this off. Some other clients that we have just did the exercise without paying the actual tax, to only find out that at the moment 40% of their assets on average are to be lost just because their infrastructure is sitting somewhere in a place that is going to be affected by climate change. So that's maybe an idea.
Thank you. And I think there was a question, yes, question over there. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Hannah and I work in the medical cannabis industry in the UK, which is an emerging industry. So obviously when you're creating an emerging industry, you're like, well, how are we dealing with sustainability? And they're thinking, we need to get cash. So that's something I've got to go work on. But one question I have is a lot of friends of mine who went with loads of energy into the sustainability cause are now becoming apathetic because of the wider geopolitical situation and feeling helpless with kind of like the refugee crisis and things like that. And a lot of them get tied into these new startups and scale-ups and the golden handcuffs of kind of like, you know, you'll make loads of money from this and also be doing good. How do you keep people motivated when they're kind of going through that 6 years of like waiting for something to happen? How do you keep like the younger talent from not leaving and not seeing results quicker? I don't know if that's a question, but...
Mark, how do you keep the young EY?
Well, I mean, I think you have to go back to every journey starting with a single step, don't you? And sometimes the scale of the challenge, and I do see this, particularly in relation to climate change, it's almost too big, too scary for people to grapple with. And I've had client organisations that have thought about making a commitment to net zero and then have decided that's going to be too expensive for us, so we're not going to do that. But when it comes to employees, I think you need to be able to demonstrate on a regular basis that change is happening, and keeping that two-way dialogue open all the time, so that you're really demonstrating that a difference has been made. And whilst we haven't got to the end of the journey yet, we said we'd do X, and actually we've already delivered that, or we're going to deliver it in 6 months' time. I know I'm as guilty of this as the rest of us, of not always communicating enough back to people within my organisation about the progress that we have made. But I have seen a real change in that recently, where we try and be more proud of what we've done already, and really talk about what we've achieved already, rather than just focusing on what's next.
There's two sides to the question that I think are important when you're implementing kind of some sort of strategy to engage employees on these topics. The first is that, you know, you need to choose your battles. You listed a lot of things that can create so much drama, but let's be honest, like, we live on a planet that is quite messy at the moment. Like, we're coming out of a pandemic after 2 years. There's the Ukrainian war, unfortunately, continuing to rage. There's a lot of depression that didn't even get measured during COVID, and I can go on and on and on and on. Pick your battles. Like, if you say that your teams are going to be engaged with sustainability, then focus on this journey, and this is also how we also explain it to our clients. Break it down into the steps that need to be taken, and then celebrate on weekly, bi-weekly basis what has been done. We kicked off, we just became a month ago a B Corp, and actually yesterday we found out that we're top 5% in the world, which is super exciting. And essentially what we did, and that brings me to the second side of the question, is we didn't give this task for the application to become a B Corp to the usual suspects. We have a quarter of our team, climate data scientists. Obviously, this is the place where you send this kind of activity because there's a lot of data you need to gather and a lot of explanation of how you're being sustainable, what kind of steps you're taking. We actually put together a team of enthusiasts plus some scientists that were behind this project, which in a practical way, what this means is advice is basically giving people the license to be in charge of something they're passionate about. If you only focus on the skill sets and kind of what they're capable of, or if you tell someone that is, eating meat that this is the one thing that they need to stop doing, like focus on the things that they can deliver on and they get excited about, and this is what keeps the momentum and the enthusiasm going, and does a good job.
I was just one tiny thing before you go. I saw a chart turn around the other way recently that was to do with reducing climate change and the journey we're on, and it presented it as it basically turned the scale upside down. So you saw the achievements as
that's interesting.
rather than the problem.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah, and
positivity.
Yeah, definitely, and also I think painting a vision of a hopeful future, just generally rather than a terrible one. Kristian, you were going to say.
I would like to combine what Lubomila said on choosing your battles and what you said about tracking change.
Yeah.
So what we do is that we have a North Star metric, and we selected that North Star metric on what good do we think that we are in a unique position to do. And that is to help our clients reduce carbon emissions. So on a monthly basis, we look at how much carbon emissions is actually our clients reducing, and how many companies, and right now there are several thousands that we're helping on their net zero journey. So I would really kind of encourage finding that North Star and follow up on it on a regular basis, because you can't do everything at once. There's like thousands of topics and injustices all across the world. But if you get carried away as a business trying to solve everything, then you're going to solve nothing. So really kind of focus on what makes you unique as a business in terms of the value that you deliver to the world, and track that on a weekly, on a monthly basis. It's very exciting.
No, I love that. That's great. Very sad. I thought we might have time for one more question, but actually we're being flashed red, very sadly. But I'm sure you can catch up with our panelists outside if you want to have a further chat with them or ask them on their social media accounts. But I'd like to say a big thank you to the panel, Mark, Kristian, and Lubomila. Please give them a round of applause. Thanks also to Anushka for moderating, to Lily and the tech team who've been amazing. Bless you. Thank you very much.